Hello. Okay, I'm continuing the gigahertz discussion stuff. Let's see. Here's two messages I haven't read. I need to refresh this page, huh? Okay, yeah, it starts here. However, I haven't put the previous thing into the tree. So I should do that. It's this stuff. So I'll start up here. And I'll throw the link in chat. Okay, which one's the parent? It's gonna be one of these three. Or at least somewhere in this group. So not the baby stuff, not the parent stuff. I'm gonna put it under here. Need to put this as like considering this idea, not claiming it. Or it's like, it's not even that, it's but he doesn't think it's my position and it's not his position. But he's putting it forward for discussion, which I think is completely reasonable. I'm not objecting, it's just a little awkward to phrase it. Um okay. I'll say stated. Idea stated for discussion. Which gigahertz disagrees with. There we go. Okay. The essential attribute that's missing is that they won't stop social posturing and reading things by social interpretations, and this blinds them to what you actually say and gets in the way of learning. Something like that. But it's not so much a sin of omission, like inability to think rationally, it's a sin of commission, actively destroying this conversations with social. It's very hard to tell what they could do if they just stop the social stuff. Like maybe on top of that, they're too incompetent to have objective world discussions because they have no practice or something. But maybe sometimes they turn off some of their social and then they're way more lucid for a while until they turn it back on. So it seems like some people, it seems sort of not hopeless when you get them to temporarily be in a less social mode, but it's very hard to get it to last. Um, okay, I don't know how I'll break that up. Let's see what I said. Okay, I responded to this. I'll just start tagging things. Okay, that's like a minor clarification. Okay, then we have this paragraph. This is a key paragraph. But that's a short answer. And then I talk about the two world stuff. So I need to quote something else. Minor tangent, not important to gigahurt, but it's try to, not try and. And it's not just like a rule. It's not arbitrary. If you think about the meanings of the words, try to makes more sense. Try to means we're trying to do something. What is that thing? Try and means on the one hand we're going to try, and on the other hand we're going to do a second thing. So it disconnects them. Try to links them directly. Try and separates them as we're going to do one thing and we're going to do a second thing. So it doesn't mean that we're trying to define, it means we're trying and we're defining. So defining is not a child under try when you use and. This exact formulation, try and, is a fairly common error. Okay, so let's. Oh yeah, if I don't put it in quotes, and then it's a paraphrase by default. Let's define what a rational conversation partner is. Gigahertz. Okay. There are two worlds, objective and social. People are bad at mode switching. One of the things we'll get into below, I skimmed a little bit of what he said, is people don't just exclusively pick one mode, usually. Occasionally, they do an approximation of just one mode. But most of the time, they're doing a mix. It's often a pretty social heavy mix, but sometimes there are situations where they go into a more of an objective heavy mix, like that's what scientists sometimes do. But like in a social situation where people are focused on social dynamics, like in a lunchroom where someone's bullying someone with mean comments, objective reality still plays a role. Like you have to be aware that there's a table there. If you, it's not purely about what do other people think. Also, there is a table there. If you walk into that particular spot, you'll run into the table and be embarrassed for your lack of skill at dealing with the objective world. In other words, part of what is socially expected of you is to have certain very basic, simple knowledge of the real objective world and to be able to deal with that correctly. And yeah, so they often read it both ways, but not always. Sometimes they're pretty blind to the objective meaning, or at least a part of it. Like maybe they'll notice like a very basic, superficial objective meaning, but miss most of the details. See, roughly what happens is most conversations only use undetailed, basic, objective meanings. And then when you try to have a rational conversation on a forum and talk about like sophisticated, advanced, complicated philosophy, then you try to put like way more objective meaning into your sentences with more details and stuff. And then people keep reading it like normal, where the objective meaning is always superficial and they spend most of their attention on the social meaning. And then communication breaks down if one person's doing that and the other isn't. Or if they're both like mostly social, communication also breaks down when they're trying to have a rationalist discussion, because they each introduce like different objective stuff. Like they're trying to have a rational discussion, so they try to do a bit of objective discussion. But they're not on the same page about like what details to try to think objectively about. Like they're each they're mixing in a little bit of scientific mindset, but they don't exactly overlap or match on what they're thinking about scientifically. So then they have a hard time. In addition to the fact that there's still a bunch of social going on. Yeah, by the way, there's more than two ways to read sentences. Like you can interpret them a bunch of ways, but my theory is that there's two like main ways that our culture cares about as a good like approximation, a good rule of thumb. There's two main styles about how people think or read. Okay, good enough for now, I think, on the paraphrasing. So these need to be red. And this one needs to be aqua. And I'm caught up on the tree for my older stuff. Okay, so from here, I skimmed this one. And then I gave two examples. And then I skimmed a little of this one as well. I don't think that they would. I think the rules for how their research works and what impresses them and what they think is notable and so on are quite incompatible with my way of thinking. Yeah, so my guess is over 99%. It's contextual, like maybe 99's high. Like I don't know how many people are like so-called autistic or whatever, or where to find them. Some people are like really weird and do different things. But like, well into the 90s, I'd say. But people don't do it 24/7. Like there's people who do it like most of the time, but occasionally can get them to stop for a little while. And then there's people maybe who do it half the time, which would be quite rare. And it's not just like a raw percentage of time, like there's triggers for when they do it and when they don't and why. Basically, I think that their empirical research into these things is most of it is useless. Most of it is like negative value. It's they need to do conceptual thinking and explanations and debate and argue their points. And most of the dispute is about like intellectual arguments, not evidence. Evidence will not fix or change most of the key points. Like most of the open debate points don't hinge on if only we had more data we could figure out which side is right. They are about different interpretations of the existing data. The existing data is so widespread from people have interacted with people before, they've seen evidence. Like you can get plenty of evidence just like looking around on Reddit. I mean, it's not perfect for all purposes, but for a lot of purposes, it's plenty. But anyways, also like research opportunities are defined primarily by social status. Um, Exceptions are more common in the hard sciences, which are more objective. This is not hard science type culture. You can't prove you're right about cognitive biases type issues in the same way that you can about a law of physics with an experiment with measurements of physical phenomena. All of the research in this area is open to many interpretations. There's always many uncontrolled factors. This makes it much more squishy and gives people a lot more wiggle room to decide what they want to believe or not. Which means if they don't like you or they think you're an outsider or something, they can ignore you or say you're wrong. They have plenty of rule of man instead of rule of law available to do that. Anyway, backing up. I'm doubtful that this will be it. I think you'll say if they're really doing that, that's impermissible. I expect most of the disagreement to be about, are they really doing that? Is that really what's going on? Or am I just like reading things into the context that aren't there and like misinterpreting people? But I think you'll generally agree that if my interpretations of what's going on are correct, it's impermissible, irrational, etc. Like, I don't have a shortage of strong negative interpretations of things that are, fairly blatantly irrational. I don't know what type of line this is. I agree it's not all or nothing under multiple interpretations of what you're referring to. Yeah, I picked the topic because it's stuff that I write about anyways and have been writing about for years. So a lot of what I'm doing is stuff I would have wanted to do anyways. And it's helpful to engage with a particular person in certain ways. There's upsides and downsides. Um, And yeah, there's a lack of availability of this type of discussion, at least in my experience. I know that's one of the things somewhat under debate, but I have a lot of experience with there being a lack of availability, which has come up before a lot, and a lot of people's response is to accuse me of doing things wrong. Like I'm bringing the problem on myself. The reason I experience a lack of availability is that I'm bad at discussion in certain ways. I get those claims a lot, but pretty universally without much in the way of details. Like, occasionally they'll go through a few back and forths with a few initial claims and stuff that are repetitive to things I've heard and answered before. But then they always like stop discussing before they actually say stuff that's new to me and would change my mind. Basically, that's my experience. Now, this I actually disagree with. People are often not equals. For example, when I first met David Deutsch, we were not equals. I lost every significant debate for approximately the first 5 years. And I was fine with that. It's fun to lose debates. Like I prefer losing debates. When you lose a debate, you get to change your mind. When you win a debate, the other guy gets to change his mind. So losing is a bigger personal benefit. But anyways, there's certainly some ways that like there's some sorts of equality or something that are important. But you can't just assume that uh, Elliot came up with that idea, therefore it's wrong. But if David came up with it, therefore it's right. Like that kind of inequality isn't going to work for a discussion. Like in a lot of ways, it's not about the people. It doesn't matter if one person is much more skilled than the other. What matters is what are the nodes in the discussion tree, and either person can contribute to that. Um, However, skill gaps can cause a lot of trouble because sometimes people contribute a bunch of very confused discussion tree nodes, and then you try to clear it up, and then they contribute new confusions while you're trying to clear up the first confusions, and it's very hard to work with. And in that kind of situation, if they knew that they weren't very good at discussion, maybe they'd be willing to slow down and go one thing at a time and work out one of their confusions in enough detail that they finally understood it themselves, and then stop making so many claims that are above their skill level. Like they're overly confident about a bunch of claims they shouldn't be making because they don't know what they're talking about. And if they would recognize what their skill level is and what sort of claims they can actually make in a reasonable way, maybe they could slow down, be more careful about what they say, work through things step by step, starting at the beginning instead of in the deep end, and then actually make progress. But people usually don't want to do that because they want to pretend that they're already good at stuff. And that desire to pretend to already be good at stuff is it doesn't work when you're not already good at stuff. I think like this kind of signaling, there's different types. Like I can talk to someone about Popper, and it could come out that I've read a lot of Popper and they've read very little, and I've read primary sources and they've only read secondary sources, and that this is like a major aspect of what's going on in the discussion. You know, that's a thing that happens because there are a bunch of misconceptions about Popper that are common in the secondary literature, and then you read the actual literature and it contradicts them. And so if I think that that's a relevant thing and I try to explain that, that could be taken as signaling that I'm superior because I've actually read Popper and I have better knowledge of the topic. But it can also be taken as like a relevant, constructive, useful thing that I have certain information available that's helping inform my perspective, and I can share some of it, and the other guy can ask questions about it and like use it as a resource instead of taking it as a threat. Like the same thing, like the objective knowledge gap, can be taken on the one hand as I'm socially better than you, which is just going to destroy the conversation. And on the other hand, as like we have to look at our resources, who knows what, who has what skills, etc., and then try to use those resources in ways that work and make sense. And sometimes there are mismatches where someone's like trying to use a resource they don't have, trying to use a skill that they think they're good at, but they're bad at it, so that keeps outputting errors, stuff like that. And those things like matter. And they're hard to talk about because people often take them as superiority, inferiority signaling, which is one of the ways that social stuff gets in the way of discussion. It makes it harder to address the actual situation. One of the sort of models of rational discussion is don't talk about attributes of the sources. Don't talk about the people at all. Only focus on the ideas. And you can try that, and there's some benefits to it. But what happens is you find like patterns, and then you have to talk about methodology. And like life matters, and attributes of sources end up being relevant to the discussion. Like someone doesn't know much about something, or someone knows a lot about something. Someone can follow programming analogies and someone else can't because they don't understand programming. Like what background knowledge people have affects how you can talk to them and what sort of references they'll follow. And like you can pick examples that a person will agree with instead of disagree with. Like you can try to avoid unnecessary controversies, but when you do that, you're basing it on attributes of the discussion partner rather than the discussion, right? You're not just looking at what example would work in this discussion context. You're looking at what example would work in the discussion context, which is flexible and also would work for the specific person I'm talking to, or a specific small target audience or something. Things like who's a beginner and who's not have relevant consequences in discussion flow. Like, sometimes you're going over stuff that one person has already taken into account, and they've taken into account the next steps and the next steps and the next steps and the next steps after that already. And then the other person, it's like all new to them. And they're like thinking about each step and like, oh, this is interesting, and trying to work through it, and like the other guy's seen it all before. That's like a relevant difference between people. And just pretending like refusing to consider who the people in the discussion are and just trying to like not notice that in any way um is troublesome. One of the things that happens is you can be like 5 steps ahead of the other guy, and then he like goes forward 2 steps and is like, okay, good discussion, I got pretty far. And you're like, we didn't even get to anything close to new for me. Like that's a problem. And it can be a recurring problem for some people if they try to avoid all meta discussion. Let's see. This isn't directly about the two worlds thing. It's below here. Okay. By the way, people sometimes think I'm uncharitable with these interpretations, and I don't think so. And that's first of all, it's not an argument. Right? They think I'm uncharitable because their initial interpretation is more positive. But you can't sort out like who has a bias or who's miscalibrated or whatever on the like a positivity negativity spectrum by who's more negative, or by whose interpretation is more unconventional or unpopular or something. Like none of those tell you where the truth is. Um, but I also have some evidence of calibration of various types. One is plenty of failed discussions, plenty of examples, plenty of times that I've seen disaster coming and then it came. Often it's hard to figure out ways to avert disaster. So if I don't have a good idea about how to solve it, sometimes I just walk into it anyways to get evidence. But I've already done that a lot of times, so I'm tired of it uh, in a lot of cases. By the way, as far as I know, I'm the philosopher with the most discussion experience. Like out of all living philosophers, or I think just all, because like typing is such a huge advantage in the internet. Like, I'm not aware of anyone who's even close. Anyways, regarding charitability, my experience with David Deutsch was we often made guesses about what was going on in discussions behind the scenes, discussed them and analyzed them, including like social aspects and psychological aspects and that kind of thing. And then the discussion often would play out with no mention of those things. They're often my own discussions, and I'd just try to write about the issues and keep doing that and so on. But meanwhile, we were speculating about what was going on and trying to understand it. And my experience is that we were both calibrated significantly on the side of charity, because whoever had the more negative interpretation always was right. which means people were never jumping to negative conclusions without adequate evidence, argument, etc. Like it was just we were always using the most positive interpretation that we found viable. And then whoever had a more negative interpretation was always because they had noticed something bad. And then the other person conceded. So that was quite a while ago, but yeah, we both had negative insights that we shared with each other. Because yeah, we both that was sort of like 50-50 on for a while, for like a few years, on who would be more negative and would come up with some negative factor that the other person hadn't thought of. On the other hand, like missing positive factors was not really a thing. The person with the less negative interpretation was never like, well, here's something that looks promising and good. Did you miss this and fail to take it into account? Like that wasn't happening. It was just who could find more negative factors was really the determining issue. And yeah, basically no one was making negative claims that got refuted. They were always like conservative and careful enough. Now, arguably, I've gotten more negative since then in certain ways, but that process has been due to uh, like learning more PUA stuff and more experience and evidence and so on. Like, and I think my predictions and my understanding of what's going on have gotten a lot more accurate. But at least that's how I interpret and experience it. Like this could mean a line for what we'll put up with. I don't have anything remotely like a line for what I'll put up with in conversation, I don't think. I mean, maybe you could find like a really extreme line, but it's very variable for me based on context. Like I'll overlook a huge amount of stuff if I just don't care and want to focus on something else. Overlook like intentionally, not like being blind to it, just ignoring it. Sometimes I talk to people who are being extraordinarily hostile. I can be quite insensitive to it, but other times, if I don't see anything else interesting going on, I'll just comment on their hostility directly, like if that seems like the most interesting thing to me, which often ends discussions very quickly. But let's see, what was the other interpretation? Even this is a little bit sketchy because sometimes, depending on who says, two different people could say the same note, and in one case I'd refute it, and in the other case I'd like do meta discussion about like ongoing methodology problems. Like, so one of the things that happens is if it's the first time that they make an error, it's often a good idea to refute it. If it's the fourth time that they make the same type of error, it's often a good idea to talk about the pattern instead of the individual error. But that goes in the discussion tree. Like, you look at the discussion tree and you find patterns in it, and then you comment on the group. So it's not exactly about the source. Oh. That's not like that's not a very good clarification, I don't think. What does it say exactly? Like endowed by their creator or something with inalienable rights? Make sure you have rights in a discussion. Political rights aren't at issue. Um, life, liberty. I don't see how that clarifies. So I'm just gonna ignore. Oh, I hate that one in a lot of ways. I think there's a lot of things really badly wrong with it. Like, so I've had experiences in voice discussions in person where someone says something I disagree with, and then they want to keep talking and building on that point, and I want to interrupt them before they forget the thing they said and say a bunch of stuff that I know is going to be irrelevant. And I've had conflicts with people over that specific case where I think waiting to your turn is destructive to the conversation. I think managing voice conversations where only one person can talk at once is tricky and requires like some sophisticated methodology to do well that manages the flow of who says what at what time. And like you really need to limit how many discussion nodes someone says that the other guy disagrees with, like at the same time, or it gets really unmanageable. Another thing is which is also not a thing, but people should wait for the other guy to take notes. Like, stop in the middle of what you're saying, let the other guy take notes or think about it, and then continue. So in that case, you're interrupting the person without talking, like you're silently interrupting them and asking for more time to process, which is awkward and I think uncommon, but it should be a thing. Or, a better thing in general is just use text, or at least recorded formats that allow asynchronousness. Things that allow people to reread, rewatch, re-listen, to take their time, to pause whenever they want to write their own thoughts at any point. See, one of the problems with not interrupting is they say something, you have a thought about it, and then you have to wait, and then while you're waiting, you're trying to listen to the new things they say, but you're also trying to remember your thought. And now you have to do two things at once, and that's hard. And it often fails. And then what if they say like several things that you have replies to? Now you're trying to remember like 5 replies at once, while also listening to the new stuff they say. And it just becomes way too hard to deal with. So yeah, I think the rules for talking precedents are broadly irrational, horrible for discussion, poorly organized, etc. And I think that a lot of it is based around pretending people are more equal than they are, like sort of giving everyone a fair turn, as if their contributions were all equally relevant and valuable, and everyone should have equal talking time. And I mean, that's sort of a first approximation, but then what actually happens is whoever is more socially savvy can get way more talking time in a lot of contexts. And can, because there's rules about when you can break in. See, the standard social rules are not wait your turn to talk. They are, there are lots of different break-in points where you're allowed socially to interrupt someone, but you're not allowed to interrupt at other times. And also it depends on what the interruption is. Like, a lot of the time, like, you can interrupt if you say certain things, but you have to get like certain keywords in the very beginning, or like communicate that you have a valid reason for this interruption right away. And there are social rules about which reasons for interruptions at what points are valid. And so people who are socially savvy get to break in a lot and get away with it, and then people who are not socially savvy but have a logical reason for why it's important that they break in right now, can be hated and vilified for insisting or being, if they stand up for themselves at all. I think that, like, these are both wrong. Both of these are socially not the right thing to do. What they often do are fake discussions or fake persuasions, but there's actually, like, they often do not actually persuade people, but signal that they've, discussed and persuaded as much as they're going to, so you better pretend to agree. Because they've signaled how reasonable and fair they are, so now you have to reciprocate, or you're going to get blown out of the water, or be seen as the aggressor or something. They put you in a position where it's very hard to dissent anymore, which is very different than actually persuading you. People do that to children all the time. There's like a fairly limited limit on how much a child gets to dissent and ask questions, and the parent says, I gave you reasons, I did the persuading thing, I did the rationality, now you have to be reasonable and listen, which isn't how rationality actually works. There isn't some sort of like numerical limit on questions or the parent's patience or something. But yeah, the authorities, it is trendy to signal how rational you are and not just give orders. But the savvy people just maintain social control anyways, they just do it in more subtle ways. I think like the hatred of arrogance I think is really bad. Like, it's not A lot of, I mean, it depends. A lot of what's called arrogance is people like having a positive opinion of themselves, often with good reason. Like there's, I mean, plenty of people are arrogant for stupid reasons, but plenty of people think they're good at something and they are good at it, and then they're attacked as arrogant. You're supposed to be humble in ways that do not correspond to reality. Yeah, because that's try hard. And because it doesn't pay lip service to the scientific method and rationality and so on, which matters in some subcultures. You can get away with quite overt signals sometimes, though. It's quite contextual. It often doesn't. People get away with being wrong all the time. There's plenty of people who maintain their positions while being wrong over and over. One of the ways they do this is with Fall Guys. They find other people to blame, and they get someone else to take the status loss for them. There's a lot of maneuvering over that. A lot of people spend more of their time and effort trying to make themselves blameless in certain ways than on actually doing productive things. Anyways, there's other ways you can look at this. You can look at it as like, this is an extra limitation on discussion. You have to be careful with whatever it is that people think sounds arrogant. Otherwise, they'll destroy the discussion. This one means you have to be careful with whatever it is people consider an overt social status signal, or else they'll destroy the discussion. This one means you have to fit certain norms of what counts as persuasive discussion style rather than giving order style, or else people will react badly. It's just, are you conforming to certain trends and norms? And there's a huge amount of leeway within them to do irrational and bad things. And there's room outside of them to do good and productive things. Because the social norms about what is seen as the rational style differs from actual rationality. Like, it's not a perfect match. I don't think it's actually very close. Like, I think it's closer to cargo culting rationality than actual rationality. I don't think all social status dynamics are purely bad. Like, that's an overly strong statement, but there's a lot of badness all over the place, I think. Like, purely bad is a very strong statement. There's something interesting about the hurts them part, because I think it hurts the other people. I think the people who do learn social dynamics, on the whole, are hurt more, are worse off, because they're the ones with less access to rationality. And like, irrational lives hurt. So like, there's more of the overt actions by people to hurt each other on purpose are directed at the misfits, but more of the actions by reality to hurt people are directed at the non-misfits. a lot of this all you need to not be hurt too egregiously by this is one, for your parents not to hurt you. Two, for your parents not to force you to go to school because the school is going to be mean about it. You're going to run into a lot of problems with both teachers and peers. There are other problems with school as well, but there are definitely social. Social is going to happen. And three, I guess there's four. Okay, three, you find like some friends, and maybe like a spouse, whatever, that you get along with, okay. And four, which I think is achievable. Like you can be kind of picky about your friends and find some people that you can put up with. And four, you need to find a way to deal with money that isn't just like go into a regular office with office politics and have people be mean to you. Like there are a lot of options that you can get jobs where you don't need to be socially savvy and things will go okay. Like you have options like remote work tends to have a lot less social. Not trying to have like a long career with promotions in a single company tends to help. You can do things like make a website, make an app. A lot of blue collar work also can be better in this way. There's a lot of jobs where you're like directly productive and it gives you some, like if that's the focus of your job, it tends to be better. Whereas no, it's just me. This is a solo stream. The worst jobs in terms of social are some of the ones that are like administrator positions and like middle management and ones where you like don't actually have to get that much done and there's not enough like objective constraints on what you do. And if it's all a bit arbitrary and pointless, then like social kind of takes over. Whereas if it's like bricklaying, then there's not that much room for your managers to just make up arbitrary shit and boss you around in random ways. Like the thing that matters is whether the bricks got laid. There's a lot of office work that's kind of busy work. There's a lot that's real work. Like I don't want to trash all office work, but there's definitely a category of kind of useless work. And the people who do that kind of work often have like very social workplaces. And also the people who work in things directly related to social, like people who work in fashion. Those tend to be very social jobs. Anyway, so I think it's possible to go through life without it being such a huge problem. Um, like for me personally, um, once I escaped school, then it hasn't been like such a big problem. Like so it's a problem in terms of philosophy discussion, but that's like optional. It's like, I go do that, I don't have to do it. So like it's a thing I work on and encounter by like, going to less wrong and getting attacked uh on a very voluntary basis, and I can control the dosage and I can leave whenever I want to, and so on. Like I'm not committed, I'm not pressured into it, so it's much more manageable that way. So like yeah, there's problems where it gets in the way of some of the discussions I would like to have and for those discussions to exist and so on, but it's not like a direct personal problem. It's just the field's not very good that I'd like to engage in. School wasn't that bad for me either in a lot of ways because I was tuned out to a lot of it and didn't care or pay attention to it. Like it's miserable if you want to be liked and fit in and you're trying to do that and you're not doing very well. You're at the bottom of the social calibration and so on. Like that's awful. But but if you're not playing the game, which is uncommon, and like people will say they're not playing the game, but they are, or they'd like to. But if you're actually not playing the game, it's it's not as bad. Which I wouldn't say I was like 100% not playing the game, but mostly not. It helps a lot to have outlets, like other things to do. Like I played a lot of chess. A lot of the chess I played was with people who went to other schools. So I was frequently exposed to people who weren't even from my school. So it's horizon broadening, like the people at your school don't seem like the whole world when you have constant contact with other people. My main problem in school was just that it was boring. Like the academics were too easy, the teachers were dumb, etc. Fortunately, my schools did not have substantial problems with physical bullying. Because, yeah, getting beat up fucking sucks. That makes things a lot worse. Some people tried to socially bully me, and I didn't. In middle and high school, that wasn't really a problem for me. Like they had a hard time getting to me, and I wasn't physically scared of them, which makes it a lot easier to stand up to them. Like I sort of want to reply to all these, but it's way too many things at once. Maybe we should like. I think we need examples. They're hard to discuss without examples. I'm not sure what function you mean. I could try to figure it out, but I think it would be easier if you just drew up a very quick approximate graph. Also, I think I disagree. I think there are breakpoints and discontinuities. This is a recurring theme in my thinking. I think looking for, yeah, discontinuities or breakpoints is extremely important, and a lot of people aren't expecting them and aren't always looking for them. But I think they come up quite a lot. You don't get a smooth graph. But it's very hard to find them in a like an abstract way and graph them because they're quite like contextual and I don't think this is 100% wrong, but I think it's mostly wrong. I think the types of bonds and rapport people build, um, there's a lot of like fakeness or they don't last well. They don't hold up under problems. What it reminds me of is how easy it is to catfish people. Like you can go read about catfishing and people like go online and pretend to be a girl or they are a girl but they lie about their interests, their situation, etc. You can get people to fall in love with you and it's not that hard. You can do it as either gender. You can get girls to fall in love with you too. I'm not speaking from personal experience, but like there's public examples and stuff. And so it shows something about how easy it is to build like fake bonds. And I think when people build bonds that aren't fake, it's usually built on like very similar interactions, so it could be fake, and they can't tell the difference. It's not distinguished well because of the lack of objective stuff involved. It's just a bunch of like rapport signaling and bond signaling and so on, and it's like insubstantive. I think it often doesn't work out well for people. It especially doesn't work out well for people when they want something with a bunch of like difficulty to it, like a marriage to come out of it. Because then you put this bond under like all these strains and you run into like real concrete practical problems and you find out that the bond has no way to deal with it. But it works better when you're like friends or coworkers and the bond can be maintained by just everyone doing a bunch of social behavior indefinitely into the future and not that much comes up that like challenges it. Like if everyone just keeps trying to play along, then they can. Okay, anyways. I don't know what the axes are supposed to be or which way is. Like, even this doesn't say which way's up. Or, yeah, I could try to figure it out, but I think it's better if he just gives an example. Like, for one thing, I don't know how to interpolate functions. Like, you have two different graphs, and then you're like somewhere in between. Like, there's a wide range of things that could mean. So I think no matter what I do, it's going to be quite ambiguous. Yeah, the mode switching is approximate. Sometimes you see this with like really dysfunctional government policies or corporate policies as well that are just like really, really detached from reality. And they only have to do with the sort of social debate internal to the organization. But you also see it just in conversations where people cannot figure out what your words literally say. People losing touch with social signals is um is less common, I think. But it is a thing and it's not super rare. Like people playing chess or just games in general. Sometimes they focus on the game itself, the strategy in the game, what will work in the game within the game rules, etc. And they're not thinking about social concerns when they try to figure out their next move or action or whatever. People can play chess without telling stories about how you're like a cruel leader for sacrificing that pawn. They aren't always looking for social meaning and everything. And scientists manage to focus on some objective stuff sometimes. Yeah, sometimes this happens. It's just harder. And okay, so one way to think of it is very fast mode switching. Like you say something and they read it one way and then they switch modes and read it the other way. But you can also just think of it as sort of like joint awareness of both. It's like there's like two different themes or interpretations. Because they're often simultaneously aware of both. Interplay between social and objective is often used for social purposes because you can say sentences with double meanings that your audience will pick up on both meanings. Yeah, there are other modes. These are like different dimensions. Like you can have flow plus objective at the same time. They're compatible. Yeah, to me that sounds like that's how horrible social is. Most people like can't even think very well. and until they get some distance from other people. I can think during conversation. I can think out loud while talking to other people and be creative, and I'm not like the social doesn't ruin it for me. I don't know what this is supposed to be a counterexample to. But I think this is common. Like, this is a good example of how often the evidence is not in dispute with these things. Like, this interpretation might be in dispute, but, right, like, this might be a different interpretation than what he was thinking of, but I don't think the issue here is about, like, what evidence we're familiar with. Like, he's talking about common things, they're well known, we're both familiar with them. The evidence part's not a big deal. Okay, so I said I can give examples of the social world, and then I give two examples. Social world example. Those in the tree. Where's social world? Two worlds. Here we go. Example one of social world analysis. So I'll just link it. No, I shouldn't do it that way. I don't think. I'll do it that way. Okay. Three. Okay, so I didn't put this stuff into the tree yet. I started responding to it. So these things are often resilient to the receiver thinking about it, and they're hard to fight back against even if you know what's going on. Recorded audio is also non-real time. I think text is better overall. Like if I had to pick one, I'd pick text. But I think audio is useful in some ways, and video as well. It has advantages in a bunch of dimensions, despite being worse on average. There's also advantages to real-time conversation, but I think they're overused. I mean, real-time conversations are overused, not the advantages are overused. And there are also dangers to real-time conversations, apart from people like not having enough time to think and organize what they're saying and so on. Like it's easier to get caught up in social dynamics and for things to get out of control and so on in real time. By the way, I don't have a shortage of research opportunities. I have like, yeah, I have plenty of important ideas. The most important, probably, in my opinion, is yes or no philosophy. Epistemology is my primary field. And the very high level summary is the idea of strong and weak arguments is a misconception. It's important to figure out how to judge things in a binary way of refuted and non-refuted. And there are tools and methodologies that enable that. And there are fundamental problems with degrees and statistics, which they do have their place in sort of like limited niches, but they're massively overrated and should not be the primary thing in the global picture. Also, like, the word research is it's ambiguous between intellectual research and empirical scientific type research. And, like, long story short, I don't respect most of the so-called scientific empirical research in these kinds of areas, including from these people. In fact, challenging them is one of the things that has gotten me downvoted the most on Less Wrong. And there's also there's a section in one of David's books about explanationless science and correlation science, criticizing it. I think there's something like majorly wrong with a lot of the social sciences. I think like the large majority of work in those fields is negative value. And yeah, I've gone through examples before. Yeah, like their conjunction fallacy research in particular, I've looked at, and as always, there are a bunch of uncontrolled factors and they don't think about them enough. They don't do a good enough job of considering that there are many, many interpretations of their evidence, and then using organized methodical argument to try to nail it down more. They just miss a lot of things, some of which are really quite blatant in my opinion. Which I posted about on Less Wrong like a few weeks ago and no one cared. It's in my blog sidebar. Right, like I wrote 3 posts in a row questioning conjunction fallacy stuff. There's like a lot more to say, but no one wanted to engage productively. It's hard to go through stuff with no representatives of the other side who are willing to discuss or debate. There are various difficulties there. The basic difficulty is branching discussion. So like, I say something and then there are like 2 things they might say, and then so to each one I have a response, and then like they might say 3 things over there or 2 things over there, and then for each one I have a response, and then for each of those they might say multiple things, and then I have to respond to all of those. And if you do that, you end up writing way too many responses. Whereas if you're talking to a specific individual, you can ask them what they think and you can follow a particular branch. And then you have so much less to write. So trying to be comprehensive against people who will not discuss is really difficult. There's things you can do to try to make it work, but it's, I have other priorities. But yeah, regarding research opportunity, I have much bigger things to say, like the way we treat children destroys their minds, or induction is totally wrong and misconceived. Like those are bigger deals. See, this kind of thing is tricky because when you rid yourself of the behavior, then in a lot of respects, especially in the short term, you're socially less effective. And the short term can easily be like longer than your life. There are social pressures to do these kinds of things. There, whatever. He missed impropriety. Impropriety is also a social view. I should actually read all the bolds before I say I agree. I just glanced. Wave of embarrassment, avert their eyes, pretend to be studying their notes, smirk, slide on glasses. Yeah. Okay, shocked and impropriety are also both social. shocked and anxiety are both guilty. Oh, I'm not at all. I think if people don't want to be rational, trying to force them into it is not how you get good scientists. I think the people who have to be socially pressured into pretending to be rational are just causing trouble. They make it hard to distinguish and spot the real scientists. There are people who are inconsistent. They're good at one thing and terrible at something else. So they can like treat other people irrationally, but then do certain limited science stuff in a good way. I don't think them faking anything helps though. Like I don't think the part where they're faking rationality when they interact with some guy does not. It would be better if the person asking the question knew that they weren't getting a real, serious, respectful answer and that they should try to get their answer somewhere else. And it'd be better if they knew that it wasn't a real debate. That people were just putting on enough of a show to get away with what they're doing. I don't think the faking's better. Like, I think it just obscures what's going on. It's like when you make racists shut up in public, and then it's hard to tell how racist people are and how much of a problem there is, and it's hard to debate them about it. Right? When people will not explicitly admit to their irrationality stuff, then it's harder to point it out and discuss what's wrong with it and criticize it and so on. People get tricked into putting so much resources. There's a viral girl crying about it on Twitter or something the other day. She got flunked out of college class for not agreeing with her professor's politics. She had been tricked into thinking that university was a like a intellectually tolerant, diverse place with fair rules, and that if she just followed the written rules, she would do well. And then she invested a lot of time, effort, money into it, and then she found out everyone was just lying, and it doesn't work that way. And then she tried to appeal it, and it turns out that the dean is, part of the racket, and her appeal wouldn't was just sort of ignored. And yeah, so she was really pissed because she got baited and switched by the liars. Meanwhile, other people in the class were breaking the explicit written rules and not being failed. I think that if people do truth-seeking behavior for the wrong reasons, it mostly doesn't work. You end up with things like cargo culting. And if you base your society on that, it's easy for it to change into one that encourages something bad. Because the mechanisms of encouragement are equally compatible with encouraging the wrong things, or in certain ways more compatible. I don't know what everything else means, and like, what is being included here other than social dynamic. So there have been societies of status and caste and so on. One of the main like modern liberal things is getting away from that. Not having knights and lords and serfs. Not having the Indian castes with the untouchables, the Brahmins, I think. Having a society with social mobility and merit-based stuff more so has been a massive improvement. Um, but although we've toned down a lot of those social rules and enforced them less, there are still similar things going on that do a huge amount of harm, and we got like popularity contests and pandering and stuff. And then things like scientific funding, like grants, are distributed primarily by social status, which causes people to focus on social networking and office politicking and whatever, instead of being good scientists who do actual good research. Like your research only has to meet certain quality standards that are like shitty quality control, and then it's good enough that you can become famous and get a bunch of money and so on. I think that's like common. But like I think basically we have to go through examples. The main reason I wrote the article, by the way, the lying article, is because I call things lying that a lot of people resist calling lying. They don't want to say that that's lying or that it's dishonest. Alright, back to the key. Quote, aha. Are there any blue nodes, and how many quotes are there? One blue node. What do you call conscious line? Conscious line is when you consciously know that you're lying. You're like, he owes me $20, but he probably doesn't remember, so I'll tell him he owes me $30. And you're just totally doing it on purpose. Okay, so there's only one blue note and one quote. A lie is a communication you should know to be false. I think both of these abouts should be 2. People lie to themselves. You can't consciously lie to yourself. Because if you knew consciously what the truth was, then you wouldn't be able to lie to yourself. Like, you have to sort of... You can know the truth, but, like, put it out of your mind, but it can't be, like, actively in your mind, or you're not fooling yourself. It is a bit tricky, like, there's the double think thing in 1984, for example. That seems to involve, like, to some extent, in some way, putting the truth out of their mind. They don't, like, fully realize they're lying. Yeah, I think most lying to other people, the significant majority, is first you lie to yourself, then you repeat it to other people. Rather than the archetypical model of a lie that a lot of people think of, which is, I know X is true, but it's to my advantage to claim Y is true, so I'll say Y. There's a lot of social lying though that people don't quite count as lying, but if they actually analyzed it literally, they'd realize it wasn't true. But it's because, like, they say it for the social meaning, so they think about it in those terms. And social meanings are, like, a lot of them are not even on the scale of true and false, is how people think about it. This is not a paraphrase of what I said, because I wouldn't have said this neural pathways thing. Like, I'll go double check, but right, no neural, no path, No brain, no cognitive. Yeah, there's no way I said that. Oh, there's another quote. Yeah, this one's a bit tough because, like, they're all liars. Some people are, like, lie a lot more than others, though. But if you keep, like, delving and pushing and checking for basically, like, with pretty much anyone, if you keep looking, you can find subjects they're irrational about and have a bunch of rationalizations about that aren't honest and so on. Okay, I guess I'll post this. Oh, right. I need to add a link too. Here are some examples. I read this earlier today. Video of writing this message. Okay. It's hard to keep it to one or two things at a time. Like, I could try a lot harder to do that, but there's upsides to saying multiple things. I did try to keep it fairly limited for what I wrote down. Anyway, I posted that. I'm ending stream.